Hi. Okay, let's talk terminology. It's gotten me into hot water before. It's caused problems, it's caused issues, and I don't want it from this episode. So, be warned. I'm going to be using the following terms. I'm going to use the word queer. I'm going to use the word gay. I'm going to use LGBT. I'm going to use LGBTQ. I might even use LGBTQIA. Who knows? Now, these terms, I'm owning them, so don't come at me. Okay? Thanks. Alright, on with the episode. Was it all sunshine and roses? No. No, it wasn't. Some came to support because they were friends, others to laugh. But in the end, they kept coming back every week. Is that what these people want? No. They want to be treated like every other human being. If we did not extend our care and condolences, I deeply apologise. The second floor. The second floor. That is where it all went down. It was the place to be. Was it all sunshine and roses? No, it wasn't. And it never would be again after that Sunday afternoon. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So, just very quickly to say thank you very much if you were one of the people who voted for Extraordinary Stories in the Hot 50 charts in Podcast Magazine. Number 7, pretty nice, pretty sexy place to be. Alright, so just before we get the story going, I have to say this, right? I am a bad gay. I really am. I'm terrible. I missed Pride Month. I mean, I actually missed it entirely. We're now in July. Pride Month was June. Everyone else is like, Pride, a deep love, Pride. And I'm like, oh, it passed me by. And it didn't pass me by. I knew it was happening. But what I mean is in terms of I could have done an episode in that month to somehow, signal Pride Month, but I didn't. However, I'm making up for it now. So this story is a dedication to the cause, and I'll warn you right now, it's pretty gruesome. It's a horrible story, and there's no way around that. But I think what we can learn from it is that change can and is happening, and the event in this story goes a long way in making those changes. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Let's go to Los Angeles in 1968. Ah, what a time to be alive. Well, I wouldn't know because I wasn't alive, but I'm imagining it was fabulous. People looking really sharp in their suits, lots of like late 60s hair going on. Brilliant. I mean, I just basically imagine the whole thing looked like a Lana Del Rey video. Anyway, it's here. in Los Angeles in 1968 that we meet a man called Troy Perry. Okay, let's talk about Troy, because he is important. The story in this episode would not exist if it weren't for Troy. So, he was born in Florida, and he came from a troubled family. A set of quite bizarre parents who often just went off and did their own thing and would leave the kids to kind of fend for themselves. And Troy was sort of bounced about from home to home. He had brothers and sisters, and they were all displaced for periods of time when he was young. Now, as young as he can remember, people called him a religious fanatic. And I mean, I think this may be unfair. It's just that he believed in God from a very young age, when quite a lot of his family and the people around him didn't. Fair enough. You know, it's alright. You've got your own beliefs. You do you, Troy. And believe me, he did. Calling him names, that wasn't going to bother. That wasn't going to bother Troy. So he's kind of growing up, and he's really into the Bible and church. He's deeply interested in religion. But Troy is also interested in something else. Men. Troy is a man lover. Surely there's a better way of saying that. But you know what I mean, right? He's into the guys. Anyway, at about age 15, he's fully accepted this, right? He's like, yep, I'm into guys. This is what it is. And he's happy to talk about those feelings. So, he tells his family, he tells his friends, he's gay, and he's met with this advice. Marry a woman. That will help those feelings go away. Excellent advice. Excellent. And it really works. If you're struggling with your sexuality, just marry someone of the opposite sex. Problem solved. I don't think so. Anyway, sadly this is what Troy does. He follows his family advice. So, he marries a young woman who is the local pastor's daughter. And they live quite unhappily for many, many years. There's no sex. There's no real love between them. And the marriage is just this messy, unhappy place. They're both young. And it all sort of comes to a head. And the marriage ends when she finds a book under his bed called The Homosexual in America. And she's like, right, you're a big gay boy, get out. Get out of here. So, she kicks him out, and their marriage is over. Now, he's only about 17, going on 18 when this happens. And just before she's found this book, Troy has been called by God, and he's decided that he wants to be a minister. So he begins his studies, and he continues these studies until he becomes a fully fledged minister. His marriage, as I said, it was dissolving, but here he is, you know, he's working in churches, he's giving sermons, and along the way he's having himself, what should we call them, encounters with men. Now, it's at age 19, Troy will make a mistake, a big mistake. He tells church administrators of the church that he belongs to about these dalliances. Excellent word, dalliances. Anyway, he tells them about the sleeping with men, and the church force him to leave. They cast him out. They don't want no homosexual minister on their property. So Troy is deflated, he's displaced, and he kind of wanders away from religion for a while. He takes up a job working in a department store somewhere, and then he gets drafted by the army, and he has to serve for 2 years in Germany. Now, all of this is happening, and this is leading up to him being 21 years old. That's quite a lot, isn't it? In a short space of time. And he's been married, the marriage is over, he's become a minister, he's been kicked out by the church. But here's what's great about Troy. Here's what's brilliant. All that rejection for being gay has done for Troy Perry is it's made him stronger. It's made him stronger in his resolution that he still wants to be a preacher. He wants to deliver sermons, he wants to spread the word of God, and he's going to do that with a very particular group of people. The queer community. He begins by offering services in the living room of his tiny little apartment with, 4, maybe 5 people at a time who are interested in hearing what his sermons involve. He puts an advert into an underground queer magazine that was kind of going around at the time, and more people begin to join his sermons. He says this: "Some came to support because they were my friends, others to laugh at me. But in the end, they kept coming back every week, and I was beginning to grow a congregation." And grow it does. This tiny little congregation doesn't stay tiny for too long. Troy opens his arms to gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, asexual. Anyone is welcome into his church. I mean, it's great. It's pretty progressive, for early 1970s Los Angeles. And so with it continuing to grow, Troy's now in a position where he's running all over LA and he's hosting all these different groups in parts of the city. Everyone's welcome. And what they have is they have this sort of home church. This is kind of the headquarters, if you will. The mother church, I think is what they call it. Yeah, they call it the mother church. And it's in Los Angeles. And they really needed this mother church because from 4 and 5 people in his tiny little living room, Troy had built his congregation to just now over 1,000 members. I mean, it's pretty excellent work in a short space of time. But that was because there was a need for it. That was because the queer community felt like they couldn't access regular churches. They couldn't just walk in to their local church because they felt eyes upon them. They felt like they were the wrong fit for that kind of thing. And now here was Troy offering them something that felt right. Now, the meetings that they had, often they would be interrupted by gangs of thugs who threatened to beat them up. They quite often would find that their meeting spaces had been covered in graffiti, calling them queer Bible bashers. And, I mean, threats were just a part of daily life for Troy and for members of this church. In 1972, the mother church was burned to the ground in the middle of the night. Thankfully, no one was inside, but it was a warning. It was a warning from other people in LA. Get your queer church out of here. We don't want it. Was this going to stop Troy and the congregation? Of course not. Yeah, it's a pretty harsh blow, it is. It's a warning shot to the community. And that's strong. But the group is strong. So they decide to move on. What they do is when the mother church has been burned down, they just move to other premises. They start going to theatres, clubs, local libraries, anywhere that they can. Love, love the idea of this congregation going to church in a theatre. How very dramatic and camp. Love that. And the group were like excellent at things like changing location really quickly so that they could sort of be undercover and not discovered. So they would, they would go to different places and the word would spread really fast where the new meeting was taking place. So Troy named the church the Metropolitan Community Church, or the MCC for short. Now, Troy started with this little idea of pulling these people together. Actually, what Troy would go on to do, and what he was doing by just even beginning the MCC, was changing the landscape of gay America. Because Troy was fearless in his protesting and in his activism. Nothing can shut Troy up. He has a point to make, and he is going to make it. He had over 200,000 flyers printed that say, homosexuality, not a sickness, not a sin. And members would take these flyers and they would distribute them all through America. They would go to states and they would, hand these flyers out to people. And, members of the church were really behind Troy. He would lead marches and protests with banners that read things like, AIDS. We need research and help, not hysteria. Really clear messages. And this is what he was fighting for all the time, was for the rights of queer people to be the same as those of straight people. And his church and his followers, it continued to grow, and his message just got louder and stronger. I feel like I can almost hear your anticipation, because I feel it too. I felt it when I was researching Troy. I was like, oh, but I'm going to get to a point where I'm now going to have to say, but secretly he was a killer. But it's not that. He wasn't, and he isn't. Troy's not secretly anything. He's a hero in this story. He's a good guy. He was leading a band of people who just wanted change for the better. They wanted visibility. They wanted to be seen and not be treated like minorities anymore. I will say this as well. Very much his work was focused, yes, on the queer community, but Troy would stand up for any minority that he felt was being underrepresented or unfairly treated. He was really the voice of these people. So very quickly what happened was the message, it spread across other states in America, and MCC churches were popping up all over the country. They were popping up everywhere. And one of the places that an MCC church arrived was in New Orleans. Oh, it's a place I've never been, but I would love to visit. In fact, I did I don't know if you heard it, I did an interview with Jeremy Collins on podcast we listened to, and we talked a lot about New Orleans. So if you haven't listened to that, maybe you could go and have a listen. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to pop Troy on the side for a second, because he wasn't in New Orleans at the time, but this MCC organisation was there. It had an absolute presence, but other people by that point were running their own versions of it in cities. And in the one in New Orleans, it was the Reverend Bill Larson was the man in charge here. So it's 1973. It's New Orleans. And what I'm aware of is, am I saying that right? See, I would say it New Orleans, right? But I'm almost hearing an American voice in my head. And it's like, New Orleans. What was that? I don't know what the hell that was. It sounded like Miley Cyrus. But, yeah, just if you're American and you're really struggling with the way that I'm saying New Orleans, sorry, that's just the way I'm saying it. But you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, here we are. It's 1973 and it's Pride weekend in New Orleans. And there had been marches, and there had been parties, and there were celebrations. And the MCC Church had hosted a fair few events over that weekend. And on the Sunday afternoon, going into the evening, they were holding a party for 125 members of the church, organised by the Reverend Bill Larson. The Reverend Bill Larson, he looks like a right bag of fun. You can see photographs from this party, and every photograph there he is, it's like having a laugh with someone. Looks brilliant. So this was in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and it's in a building on Charteris Street. Now, not that that will mean anything to you if you're not from there, obviously, but if you ever visit, it's now a famous site, and not for good reasons. So the building overall, it was used for like lots of different things. So there were some offices in there. Others, they rented space for workshops. Different kind of uses for this building. Upstairs on the second floor, there was a bar stroke lounge area, and it took up most of the second floor. And then above that, you had the third floor, which was empty. Now, because this particular congregation were often targeted in the street by people, they were spat at, they were shouted at for being queer. Sometimes what they would need to do is enter this building from the street. They would go up to the first floor. You know those metal stairs that go from like street level up to the interior of a building? That was their way in, essentially, because the stairs were kind of hidden from view. So they were able to sort of get up those stairs without people shouting at them in the street or spitting at them or whatever. So there was a buzzer system in place, and that was to stop unwanted guests getting through the door. So members would ring the doorbell and they'd be allowed access if they were members, or they could be vouched for by someone. And this was to stop any old Tom, Dick or Betty wandering off the streets. So that was the kind of way in and way out. And the way that it worked is you went up the metal stairs and it led you to the first floor, and that's where you'd ring the buzzer. And then there was a set of internal stairs, and that led you up to the second floor, which is where it all went down, which is where the bar lounge area was. Now, they mainly used this floor of the building for meetings, sometimes for services, and they used it because it felt safe. It felt like it was their little place that was hidden away from the locals who didn't like the goddamn queer church. So here we are on the Sunday afternoon of that Pride weekend. And it's what the MCC are calling the beer bust. What is that, I hear you ask? Well, the beer bust is essentially a free dinner for 125 members and plenty of alcohol. And it was all in aid of raising money, not for themselves, but for the local school for disabled children. So this afternoon it is packed. 125 guests, they've handed their money over to the cause. Hopefully you might have seen on my social medias the image that I put up. This looks like a fun party. I mean, it's just lots of people. I think the images that you see mainly looks like men, although there were quite a lot of women there. And they're sitting at tables, they're having a laugh, they're having a great time with their friends. Go and look if you haven't seen these pictures. There's a man facing the camera who is brilliant. He's got his hand on his hip, he's got a drink in his hand, and he's wearing a very jazzy yellow shirt. He looks fabulous. So like I've said, it had to be sort of hidden away. But once safely behind those closed doors, in this fairly inconspicuous building, these people could have fun. And after all, it was the end of the Pride weekend. A local musician was the glue holding the party together. It had been his idea to raise money for disabled children. And he played the piano for the party and everyone loved it. I'm just imagining him there with his piano like, it's raining men, hallelujah, it's raining men. Nah, I'm kidding on. I'm pretty sure that's not what he was singing. Anyway, the day wears on, and the 125 guests becomes about 60 people. And those who remain are drinking, they're dancing, they're chatting with friends and partners. Two of the men at that party having a thoroughly wonderful time were George Mitch Mitchell, excellent name, George Mitch Mitchell and his partner Louis Broussari. You can see pictures of the two of these, and I think they sort of sum up what this feeling of this party was at the time. They're just having an absolutely great time together. George Mitch Mitchell was a pastor for the MCC church, and he'd met his partner, who was a bit younger, Louis, a few years before. Now they'd had to work really hard to keep their relationship a secret from their families and from other people, but inside the walls of the MCC church events, they were free to be the couple that they wanted to be. So the Reverend Bill Larson, he was delighted with this party. I mean, he had organised it. And now, here is his congregation, and they're having a great time. He's making his way around the room, he's thanking people for their donations, he's telling them when the next service was going to be. And now, why is it that at every party, there's always an unwanted guest? Roger Nunez was a local prostitute, or to use the sort of incorrect term that they used at the time, rent boy. And he occasionally turned up to church services. He would occasionally show up at events, and truth be told, he was a pain in the arse to the MCC members. They just did not want him around. He caused nothing but trouble. Now, somehow, and no one is quite sure how, he gets himself into this party on the Sunday afternoon. And it's not long before he's in the party and he's starting to bother everyone. Everyone who's just having a really nice time. He's there trying to drum up some business, but the men were trying to say to him, look, no one is interested in paying for sex with you at this time. We just need you to leave, right? We're having a great time. Get out. Beat it. So he's kicked out. And as he's escorted out, Nunez mutters under his breath, you fuckers will pay. So with Nunez gone, the party resumes. And 20 minutes later, the buzzer rings. So the man who's in charge of the buzzer, he assumes that it's just a taxi that's been ordered to pick up some of the guests and take them home. A few minutes later, after the buzzer has gone, no one comes through the door. So the barman, he goes to the door, he opens it, it leads to these internal stairs that I was talking about. He opens it and he sees that the entire staircase is on fire. A huge fire is engulfing the stairs and making its way to the second floor where the party is. At this point, panic erupts and the scene becomes full chaos. The stairs are the only way out, and they're currently on fire. Before long, the fire is spreading into the room, and members of the MCC are trying to figure out ways to get out of that burning room. One of the men suggests going up to the 3rd floor, which leads to the roof, and he gets 20 of the 60 people to go with him. These 20 people, they get up to the 3rd floor, but somewhere in the madness, the door gets locked shut behind them and no one else can get out. So access to safety, access to the 3rd floor is gone. And that now means you have 40 people trapped in a room which is on fire. Some of the guests who have by this point caught on fire attempt to throw themselves out of the windows by running at the glass and diving, trying to get to the street 2 floors below. The windows have bars on them, which makes escaping even more difficult. By now, bodies are burning and people are trying to drag each other over to the windows. The Reverend Bill Larson, the man who'd organised this, he picks up a heater and throws it at the window in an attempt to smash the glass, and it doesn't work. He by now has caught fire, and he throws himself at another window and he gets half of his body out of the window frame before a sheet of glass falls and traps him. The lower half of the Reverend's body is trapped, burning inside, while his top half is screaming at the people below in the street for help. So by now people are gathering on the street. They're watching the fire, and neighbouring bars are trying to work out how are they going to get water up there. By now people have stopped their cars in the street to get out and to watch this, and this just causes so many problems. Not knowing they were doing this, those who got out of the cars to watch the fire and to just abandon their vehicles made it almost impossible for the fire engines to get close. The fire engines couldn't get close enough to the building to start extinguishing the fire. At one point, a fire engine tries to drive along a pavement just in an attempt to get near the building and destroys 2 cars in the process. Remember the couple I told you about earlier, George Mitch Mitchell and Louis Broussard? Well, George Mitch Mitchell, he makes it to the window in safety, and in the chaos and the panic and the screaming, he realises he's lost his partner. He goes back to find him, and his partner is now fully on fire. And George Mitch Mitchell realises in that moment they're not getting out of that building. And the 2 men lay down on the floor and hold each other to death. In total, the fire lasts 17 minutes. 28 people died in that room. 1 person died from burns on the way to the hospital. 18 of the guests were taken to hospital with a range of injuries. The scene was watched by nearly 200 people from the street below. Obviously horrific. Just horrendous. But a huge part of why this story is so important is what happened next. Or, should I say, what didn't happen next. Now, when police come to investigate the fire, there's just I don't know how to dress this up. I don't know another way to say this. This is the truth. They were looking at it through a very particular frame, and that was, this is tragic. This is absolutely tragic. But it's a bunch of queers. Let's not feel too bad about it. Everything that the police, journalists, the news, politicians, and the public do next screams loudly, it's just a bunch of queers. Let's not feel too bad about it. From what police could salvage in the way of identification from the victims, they just handed straight over to the press. There you go, have this, have all these names. Now, if a fire was to break out right now in a shopping centre somewhere, and that number of people died, yes, we would be used to opening the newspaper and you would read the names of those who died. But handing those names over on that day, on that Sunday afternoon, that Sunday evening, handing them over to the press meant this. Men and women who had lived in the closet for fear, for absolute fear of their family knowing their sexuality, were now names printed in the newspaper. Lying in the hospital suffering from third-degree burns, some of the victims received phone calls from their families saying, "When you are healed, don't bother coming home. Find somewhere else to live." A primary school teacher who was so completely in love with his job was lying in the hospital, having jumped from the window of that burning room, and he received a phone call from his boss, the headmaster, who said, "Don't bother coming back to work. We don't want no queer teachers here." Police cared not one bit whose identity was revealed throughout this. Now, the news coverage was small, to say the least. The story got about 3 minutes airtime on the New Orleans news, and they moved on. It was a bunch of queers. Who cares? I think this part bothers me the most. This is the bit of the story I had the most trouble with. The local churches refused to offer funeral services to victims of the fire. There were to be no gay funerals around here. Families had to fight, beg and plead with churches in other parts of the city to bury their sons and their daughters. A very, very kind Reverend William P. Richardson, he offered to hold a service for the dead and their families could visit. Nearly 90 people attended. When his superior discovered that the Reverend had held the service, he was threatened with excommunication for daring to deliver it. This bit of it just makes me sick. Radio DJs at the time made jokes of the fire. One of them said this: "Well, look, if it's a funeral for fags they want, surely what they could do is put their charred ashes into little fireworks, send them up into the sky, and they can explode glitter all over the place. Isn't that what these people want?" No, it's not. They want a burial that says they are a human being regardless of their sexuality. The initial police investigation, it was taken really lightly. It was declared an accident and there was nothing further to be done. That was until police started hearing the name Nunez. Remember the prostitute who'd been kicked out of the party. The one who muttered under his breath, "You fuckers will pay." Well, in the days after the fire, Nunez was running around town boasting that it was him who had started the fire. He was telling people he'd been kicked out and that in a rage he'd gone to the local hardware store, bought some lighter fluid, went back, rang the buzzer, and when the door opened, he poured lighter fluid on the internal stairs and lit a match. So police bring him in for questioning. Now, the problem with Nunez is he had been in and out of local psychiatric units over and over, and he was prone to periods of time when he was out of his mind, really. Either on drugs, off drugs, and it was sometimes very hard to work out what he was talking about. It didn't always make the most sense in the world. No one was ever quite sure if his stories were true. He would tell people that this story about setting the fire was true, and then when he was questioned on it, he would take it back and say that he'd never said it. There wasn't really enough for police to go on with Nunez, so what they did was they handed him back to a psychiatric unit in the city, and within a week he had escaped and had fled New Orleans. Still, the fire was treated like a joke in the media, and many people just refused to talk about it, hoping it would go away. Police were angry if they were asked to do any work on it, as to them, this wasn't real police work. Now, you can only imagine the sort of uprising from the MCC and general queer community. It was huge. But it was shut down very, very quickly. Police didn't want this hassle. They didn't want people out with banners protesting the lack of investment, so they were just taken to jail. And that will eventually make it just die down. The story just sort of fades away. It just goes quiet. And that's because the city made it impossible for the event to be mourned and to be discussed. After 6 weeks, the whole thing was shut down. It was left inconclusive. Was it arson? Was it an accident? Police didn't know, and they washed their hands of it. The decision by police to just walk away from it meant that for years, and do you know what? I just ache at this because I think it's awful. It meant for years that some of those bodies which were burned, some of those people, they were never properly identified. And what that means is that there are families who live in, I don't know, let's say Florida, let's say Kentucky. I don't know. I'm just picking random other American places. Well, there are families who live in those places whose children had moved to New Orleans, and they never heard from them again. Their children just vanished, and they had no idea what happened to them, because they were never really thoroughly, properly investigated and identified by police. And you've got families out there who will never know if their child was one of the people that died in that fire. In 2018, yes, 2018, they finally managed to work out that a man who had lived in New Orleans at the time, called Larry Norman Frost, and he'd just vanished. His family had no idea where he'd gone. Well, in 2018, a documentary maker managed to track down the family and make the link between this victim and the family, and finally they could piece it all together, and they could go, that's what happened to him. That's what happened to this child in our family who we just didn't know. He just vanished one day, and no one ever told us he died in that fire because the investigation was so poor. The upside, the positive, if there is one, is that these people will never be now forgotten or made a laughing stock of. Thankfully, things look a bit brighter in 2020, and many, many apologies have been made. The current Archbishop of New Orleans said in 2013, "In retrospect, if we did not release a statement, we should have, in solidarity with the victims and their families. The Church does not condone violence and hatred. If we did not extend our care and condolences, I deeply apologise." Each year at the Pride Festival in the city, there is a jazz procession, and it leads from the city centre, and hundreds walk the procession, and it arrives at the building, and those who've walked the procession, they lay flowers on the street, and jazz music is played to commemorate the event. Sadly, over the years, the police in New Orleans have refused to admit that the handling of the case was weak or treated as not important. What about Nunez? Well, in 1979, a few years after the fire, in another American city, he was found dead. He had hung himself. To the queer community, this was his admission of guilt. Others will say his suicide doesn't really prove that. I mean, given that the MCC has sustained 3 arson attacks in its lifetime, I mean, the upstairs fire being the absolute worst, some will say it kind of proves maybe he didn't do it, and maybe it was an accident. But that community will never believe it was an accident. The MCC Church now has over 300 churches in the USA. Joy! That is amazing. And it's all thanks to Troy, the man who started all this. Troy is still alive. Get him. Get you, Troy. Still protesting, still preaching. And I think this is amazing, right? But politics aside, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. Troy has been a guest at the White House 5 times under the invitation of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, because they recognise his absolutely incredible services to human rights. So good on you, Troy, who I think now is like in his 80s and still protesting. Until the horrific shooting in the Pulse nightclub in 2016. The upstairs fire in New Orleans was America's largest gay attack, and it should never be forgotten. And so ends the story. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that makes up for me missing out on Pride. Yeah. Yeah, it's brutal, that story. It is brutal. It's horrible, but I think it's really important. It's really worth telling. Okay, before I get out of here, I'm just going to remind you of the usual things. You can join the Facebook group. There's Instagram, there's Twitter. I'm on Patreon if you want extra episodes. I'm about. Hit me up. One thing I will mention is I'm going to be doing a sort of, a competition, if you will. And I don't really have a great name for it at the moment. I'm just calling it Extraordinary Stories Bingo. Oh no, maybe I'll call it Extraordinary Stories Phrases Bingo. Well, that's worse. I think I've just come up with a worse title. Anyway, you remember we were chit-chatting about phrases that I was saying these just don't exist, like you're just making things up now, or like ridiculous phrases from before. Anyway, I've whittled it down to 10. Right, I've got 10 phrases here. And what I'm going to do is you'll need to be watching the social medias. So I'll put these on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They'll be up there. I'm going to put up 10 phrases. And if you're not following, by the way, on any of those things, you can feel free to, well, no one has to do this. It's completely optional. But if you wanted to, you could just take a quick note of these. Basically, throughout the next few episodes, I'm going to try and lace these phrases in to my storytelling. I'm going to try and weave them in, right? Not obviously, I'm going to try and be as subtle as I can. Anyway, the bingo part of it is this. Once you have heard all 10 phrases, you can tick them off your little bingo list. You let me know, and I will enter your name into a hat. When the time comes and I have enough names in that hat, I'm going to just select one at random, and that person gets a very special prize. And that prize is, that person's going to get a one-to-one extraordinary story. So, we can do it via phone call, we can do it via Skype, we can do it in any way that you want. But if you are one of those people who can tick off those 10 phrases, say you've heard them, then you are in with the chance of a one-to-one story just for you. So, if that sounds up your street, if you're interested, then... Okay, I'm just going to tell you what the phrases are now, but you'll see them, I'm going to put them up. Okay, so, first one is, up your butt with a coconut. I mean, come on. That's so fake, but I'll try and find a way to put it in. The bomb diggity is another one. This one. Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Number 4, talk to the hand, because the face ain't listening. Number 5, I have not a clue how you would ever get this into everyday storytelling. It's kissed on the dick by a fairy. Number 6, stick to your knitting. Sassy. Again, here's another one that's like impossible. You can't ride 2 horses with one ass. I think someone's just invented that. Okay. As dry as a dead dingo's dong. There's a lot of D's going on in that one. This, I think, is just insane. Tough titty, said the kitty when the milk ran dry. And finally, holy guacamole. Alright, that's the 10 phrases. So, the next few days I'm going to put those up and let extraordinary stories, phrases, bingo begin. If you can come up with a better name than that, please let me know. Alright, well, it's been lovely to chat with you. I hope you enjoyed the story. Speak to you soon. I said that like end of a phone call. Speak to you soon. Okay, bye then. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm out of here. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.